At the end of 2012, we had the stage where we had redone a museum exhibit to Captain Lawrence Oates, the famous Antarctic explorer. And one of the team said, you know what we really need to finish this museum off? We need an emperor penguin. And at the time we had every other variety of penguin in Antarctica, but we didn't have an emperor, which is the sort of the biggest of the Antarctic penguins. And so they said, how are we going to get one? I said, well, I'll give someone a ring and see. So I rang up British Antarctic Survey and said to them, how do I get hold of an emperor penguin? And they said, well, you know, you can't just go and nab one from Antarctica or knock it on the head. You have to get a dead one and then get a license to export it to Britain. I said, okay, that's fine. And they said, we'll ask around and see if any of our polar stations have got any news on this. A couple of weeks later, I was astonished to receive an email from the base medic at the Halley base on Antarctica to say, we've just found a dead emperor penguin. What do you want us to do with it? To which my answer was, well, get it back to the base as soon as you can. So they wrapped it up in a duvet and towed it behind a sort of skidoo back to the Halley base, and it was left outside. Now there's no problem storing things in Antarctica because they freeze almost instantly if they're dead. And so there was a block of ice containing a penguin sitting there, and it then had to wait for the supply ship to come in. The supply ship came, loaded the penguin on, took it off to the Falkland Islands. We had discovered before this that there was a wonderful gentleman called Steve the Stuffer, who was a taxidermist and had gone to live on the Falkland Islands and had taken up taxidermy as a trade. And he said, oh, I'd love to stuff an emperor penguin, never done it before. So he set to work. And unfortunately, he hadn't finished his job before the British Antarctic Survey vessel had headed back to Britain. So we were left with the problem of a perfectly stuffed penguin in Stanley, in the Falkland Islands, and no means of getting it home. So I had a thought, and I thought, oh, I know what. And I rang a friend of mine at the Ministry of Defence, who was in charge of their PR, and said, Stephen, can you help me? I want to try and see if I can use a military flight to get this penguin back to the UK. And he said, well, we'll get back to you. And a few hours later, a very smart officer rang me up and said, I'm terribly sorry, sir, we can't move your penguin because we have to charge the rates for air freight, and it would be jolly expensive flying a penguin back. It would take up about half the aeroplane. So I thought, oh, that's not a very good idea. I have to forget about that. And I was telling this story to some neighbours in my village pub when someone at the next table leaned across and said, oh, I think I can help you, Philip. And I said, how? He said, well, there's a friend of mine's just been appointed governor of the Falkland Islands, and he goes backwards and forwards. I could ask him and see if he can help. I said, well, that would be marvellous. So he went out, and next day I got an email from the government of the Falklands saying, I'm coming to Britain for consultations with the government. I'm using the military flight out, but I will bring your penguin as my hand baggage. Hand baggage? Don't know what Ryanair would say to that. Anyway, that is exactly what happened. A few days later, I got a phone call from Brize Norton, the RAF airfield at which the penguin had been flown into, saying, your penguin has arrived, sir. So I drove up with a trailer behind my car, and at the gate I said to the guard, I'd come here to pick up a penguin. And he looked at me in a very old-fashioned sort of way and was about opposite to send me on my way when I said, I think Flight Lieutenant so-and-so knows about it. So he picked up the phone and said, yes, sir, your penguin's in the third hut on the left, just straight down the road. So I picked up the penguin, brought it back here, thinking all the while, wouldn't it be lovely if the police stopped me and said, excuse me, what's in that package of yours? Anyway, we got it here, and the penguin was installed, which was marvellous. And now that means we have every one of the Antarctic penguins in the museum here in Selborne. Come and see them for yourself.